Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for our first academic writing workshop. We made a switch this year from talking about academic writing and citation during orientation in the, bundles of information that we're giving out at that time, and decided to lengthen the discussion a little bit, add a few more things in, and give you a chance to digest all of the rest of the things that we say during orientation before getting into academic writing and citations. Sammy and I are going to be talking about a couple of things today and also answering your questions. The main framework for our discussion is going to be talking first a little bit about why we cite and the significance of citation practices, how we cite, so both the why and the how to, and then I will spend some time after that talking a little bit about reference management systems and kind of platforms for keeping track of what you're citing from. All the materials, resources, readings that you are digesting, internalizing, and synthesizing as part of your graduate studies. So we're going to start with why we cite. So thinking a little bit about ideas of academic honesty and plagiarism, which are, of part of the policy of UMass Boston, right? There's an academic honesty code. Sammy, do you want to maybe get us started with this?
Sure. I'm going to start off with the question of why we cite. And I would suggest that there are three different reasons why and three different sorts of situations in which citation is appropriate. Other, of course, than we tell you have to do it. The three reasons are to allow the reader to verify information, to allow follow-up when the reader wants to follow up, and to give credit when credit is due. So first of these, allow reader to verify information. Anytime you use in an academic setting, anytime you give a piece of information that isn't common knowledge, the reader can reasonably ask, where did that information come from? And so that the reader can then determine for themselves how the information was created in the first place, what level of reliability and credibility it has, etc. So if you're saying the per capita GDP in Taiwan is 3 times what it is in China, and by the way, I'm making that up, I have no idea if it's correct. The reader's going to want to know if that information is from the World Bank, from the IMF, or from Uncle Bob's generic website. It matters. I mean, if it's from Uncle Bob's generic website, then I personally wouldn't take it that seriously. The IMF and the World Bank measure these things differently. People who actually care about these kinds of comparisons will therefore want to know what the source is, and therefore what the measures are that, or what the details of the measures were that created the information in the first place. And this is true about just about any kind of information. The second reason is to allow follow-up. The longer you stay in academia, the more you'll find yourself doing things like opening a new article and just reading the footnotes and not even bothering with the text. Because it kind of, if you know the context of the issue being discussed, you can learn an awful lot just by reading the footnotes that tells you the conversation that is being had rather than the text itself. Anything you write academically is going to be based on a lot more than you can fit in your actual paper. Even if it's a dissertation, it is built on a lot of literature that you haven't directly included. So somebody's reading it, someone is reading your work and they think it's really cool and they want to follow up on it. You want to give them the opportunity to do that. You want to tell them where your thinking comes from so that they will be even more interested in your thinking. The third reason to cite is to give credit when credit is due. And in part, this is in fact about giving other people credit when it is due. But in part also, what that does is make it clear what your original contribution is. Because the reason citation as a practice developed the way it did in academia is to identify the contribution, the individual contribution of the author, because if it's not cited to someone else, it's you. And if you don't give adequate credit to others for their ideas that make their way into your thinking and into your writing, then your readers, who will figure this out because they know the field, will not know what it is that you individually are bringing to the table. And also, you cite other people, they cite you. Giving credit redounds back to you in that way. So when thinking about citation practice, keep those three things in mind. You're trying to do all of those three at the same time. And if this means putting an extra few citations in there, that's fine. Always better to oversight than undercite. And we tend to normally think of citation as giving credit where credit is due, but that is, again, only one of the functions. You also want to give the reader the opportunity to follow up on your work, to bring them into the conversation that you're trying to have more deeply, and you are wanting to source information whenever possible so that your reader knows how to read it. So that's the why, and to a certain extent, the when.
Can I jump in here for a second?
You can.
On the why, so I actually realized that we didn't start with kind of the most fundamental part of this, which is that as a graduate student, or I guess as an undergraduate student as well, but certainly for all of you here as graduate students, academic writing means contributing to an academic conversation. And therefore, one of the parts of this that Sammy was just speaking to, which is giving credit where credit is due, you're inserting yourself into that conversation and you need to know who you are conversing with. So that's a big basis for citation in the first place, right? It's very different from kind of other forms of writing. Academic writing is contributing to engaging in that conversation with material that others, scholarship that others have published, ideas that others have had historically or in the field. And so citation practices are the way that manifests in academic writing. And I will also add to what Sammy said that it's important to think not only about who you're citing in terms of things like whether the IMF or World Bank are determining GDP in different ways and what makes sense given the context that you're in, but also to remember that citation, like many other things, is in a sense a political practice. And by that I mean that we make choices about who to cite, we make choices about who not to cite. And there are kind of foundational authors, scholars, individuals in the fields that we're in conflict resolution, human security, global governance, international relations, whose ideas get cited often. And then others cite them and they get cited again. And there's a kind of virtuous cycle of citation that becomes what's often referred to as the canon. And then there are scholars who don't get cited necessarily. And so it's important to think about why. Why are we citing certain individuals and not others? What does that say about our own understanding of the conversation, what we want to value or emphasize in the conversation, and how we are reinforcing certain ideas in the field, or allowing perhaps less prominent ideas to become more, bring them more into the conversation.
That requires a thinking process that precedes the citing process.
Well, right, of course.
Actually engage the ideas and then cite the ideas. Point well taken. On the question of how to cite, there are several different formats. Most of them are either some combination, some form of either footnotes or parenthetical citations. You will, if you have not yet, you will see both of those fairly frequently represented in journals you read, etc. For your own work, the way to figure out what citation format to use is to figure out what or whom you are writing for, and use the citation format they tell you to use, right? So if you're writing for a course instructor and they tell you to use a format, use it. If you're writing to submit to a journal, submit with the format that that journal uses. If you don't get any guidance, then it doesn't really matter. You can use whatever format you like, as long as you are consistent throughout the piece of writing. So you don't, for example, change from footnotes to parenthetical citations in mid-essay. And that the citation format is a generally accepted one in your field. It gives all the information that needs to be given: author, title, publication outlet, date, etc. If you're using a citation management software, like the stuff that Karen will talk about later, it will do a lot of this for you. If you are not, be wary about things like cutting and pasting from Google Scholar, because their stuff is put together by algorithm, not by people, and therefore is inconsistent.
And sometimes incomplete.
And sometimes incomplete, and sometimes wrong. Minor point, sometimes at the end of pieces of writing, you'll see bibliographies. Sometimes at the end of pieces of writing, you will see references. A list of references is a list of things that you have explicitly referred to in the piece of writing. So if you, for example, are using parenthetical citations, a list of references is a list of the things that you have included parenthetical citations to. A bibliography is broader. It's a set of things you've consulted. Usually, if you're doing this stuff yourself, you will be asked for a list of references rather than bibliographies, although class assignments will sometimes ask for bibliographies. questions or thoughts or interventions so far?
Can I intervene very quickly?
Yes.
Thank you. I also wanted to just say that sometimes even when you import from Google Scholar or elsewhere into a citation manager, I know Karen, Professor Ross will speak about that later. There are things that do import incorrectly as well. So it's not just copy and pasting, but also, double checking there as well.
Yes.
Thanks.
Copy editing references is like copy editing anything else. You can't rely on the machine. You have to do it yourself. For example, this is something I saw reading one of my students' submissions for class today. He was talking about assessing something. So he's using the word assess, but he forgot the last S. And what you get then is actually a word, but it's not the word you want in that context.
This isn't about citation though.
No, it's about, but copy editing more
Right.
broadly.
For sure.
It's an example of machines are useful but stupid.
We can cite you on that.
Well, yes, if you get it right.
Just put a timestamp.
Briefly on plagiarism. We tend to think of plagiarism as intentionally copying without attribution. At the graduate level, more often when people get in trouble for plagiarism, it's unintentional plagiarism. It is occurrences when other people's words have made their way into your work because of sloppy citation practice or sloppy note-taking practice. In terms of sloppy citation practice, one way that often happens is paraphrasing too closely. As a general rule, you should not paraphrase things closely. If you want to use someone else's words, use them, quote them explicitly and cite them. Otherwise, things should be written to suit the purposes of your writing. Because generally speaking, if you use other people write words the way they write them for their purposes, your purposes are different, your writing should be different. So always quote verbatim. When you're not quoting, don't paraphrase closely. You'll end up with better text that way anyway. A potentially bigger problem is situations where you see either phrases or sentences or entire paragraphs that you think are interesting, well written, whatever. So you copy them down into your notes and you forget to note down where they're from. 6 months later, you're rereading your notes. Your notes don't say that this is verbatim from someone else. So you use the text because it's interesting and well written. That's why you wrote it down in the first place. And you have thereby incorporated somebody else's text into yours without knowing it. This happens surprisingly often, including to well-known academics. And it can be prevented by developing note-taking systems whereby you never actually write down other people's text in your notes without writing down the citation. If you do that, then you look back 6 months later, it's still there as a quotation. So the upshot here is be mindful and careful in using other people's text. It is fine to quote people. You don't want to quote people too much because it's not good writing. But it's fine to quote people as long as you put it in quotation marks and cite it. The way you do that is by always making sure that when you incorporate other people's writing into your own in any way, you cite from the outset. Questions, thoughts at this point?
So I want to actually connect this back, Sammy, to what we were discussing earlier about why we cite, and think a little bit more explicitly about, you know, why we might quote an author, why we might paraphrase some publication. So, you know, if we're part of a conversation, we're drawing on ideas that other people have. And so, as Sammy said before, you know, you want to attribute those ideas to them, which is why we might reference an author or authors, or, you know, certain publications in the writing that we're doing. But one of the things that I see very often in assignments from my students are situations where they are making an argument. So a paragraph will begin with some argument, and then we'll quote some author who has written about this topic. And there is no discussion at all about why that quote or how that quote connects to the argument that's being made. So this goes from, you know, the citation practice, connecting it to what makes good academic writing. And a big piece of that is actually engaging in a conversation with those ideas. If you are quoting a scholar who is writing about a topic that you're discussing in a course paper or a thesis or a dissertation or an article you're submitting for publication, how does that quote, you need to make the connection as well. How does that quote connect to your argument? If you're making an argument and using the ideas of other authors, then, as Sammy said, you know, best to quote them directly. If you're going to have kind of close to verbatim phrasing, then just use verbatim phrasing and cite it directly, including if you are citing from a book or an article, the page that comes from, right? So it's not just including in your notes what article you read it in or what book chapter it was, but also what page, because it gives your reader an opportunity to follow up. But also, how does that idea actually connect with the ideas that you are presenting in your work as original ideas as part of your academic writing? So these two things are connected. The why and the how to are pretty closely interconnected. And if you follow the technicalities of quoting, citation practices, and so forth, but don't think about how it's connected to the broader emphasis of your writing, the contribution you're trying to make, the ideas you're bringing forth in your arguments, then that doesn't actually engage in the academic conversation, which is what we are hoping you all will do.
By way of example.
Examples are good.
So let's say you're talking about legitimacy, and I picked that just because we were just talking about that in class, which is a complicated topic and different people use it very differently. So let's say you're doing an overview of the way legitimacy gets talked about in the global governance literature. A good review of this is going to approach the question conceptually. So it's not going to say person X said A, person Y said B, person Z said C. That's a laundry list. It doesn't provide an overview. It provides a set of discrete examples. What you'd want to do in that situation is talk about different ways to think about legitimacy, and then through citation, associate those with particular authors. It could be in those circumstances that one author is particularly associated with a specific way of operationalizing legitimacy and has a nice pithy definition of it, in which case you can quote that person as an example of X kind of understanding of what legitimacy means. But for the most part, you are organizing your review of the legitimacy literature into categories that are useful for setting up your argument. So you want to write them in the terms that most effectively set up your argument. And back to Karen.
So I actually think now would be a good place to pause for just a minute and check again what questions you have, what thoughts you might want to contribute. There's mostly a sea of black squares in front of me on Zoom. So, but feel free to, raise your hand, jump in, let us know what we might clarify right now. Isabel.
Hello. So I have a question because I'm doing my literature review. Is it like the question that I have is the citation similar to the literature review? Sorry.
So when you're writing your literature review, you are going to be citing the other scholarship that is relevant to your topic, right? So what theoretical frameworks are relevant, and not only what are the theoretical frameworks, but who are the authors? What other studies have been done that are connected to this topic? And drawing from that, as you're writing your literature review, you will be citing either through quotations or through making reference to certain material. You'll be engaging in citation practices. So I'd say the citation piece is really important for the literature review. The process of writing a literature review is about putting all that material together, kind of setting the stage for the conversation, and then for your own arguments in either the paper that you're writing or your capstone, master's project, etc.
Yeah, thank you.
You are welcome. Any other questions right now?
I do.
Samantha. And then Rana. Go ahead, Samantha.
Thank you. I apologize. I'm also on as Jason, apparently. I also wanted to mention just about the literature review and citation. I think, Isabel, to your question, one of the most important things is that the literature review, the literature that you cite forms almost a basis for your own arguments and building on that. So anything that you read and that you include in the literature review that's from elsewhere, someone else wrote it, it's in an article, a book, a text, news, anywhere else, that you'll cite. And then when you contribute your own ideas, analysis, thinking, etc., that's where you'll build from the things that you've already cited, if that makes sense.
So could I just, I'm sorry. Can I just I guess I heard, and I want to say what I heard from you. So basically, okay, for example, if I have this article for nonviolence organizing, and I cite something, and then right after that, I'll talk about what I have done as with the nonviolence organizing.
So, yep, if the ideas come from the article, you'll cite those from that article specifically. If it's from your own experience, building on the article or building from an idea or a quotation from the article, that is your own work. Is that right, Karen?
Yeah, and I think, Isabel, it might be helpful for us to have a separate conversation after this to talk more specifically. I know you're working on your master's project right now about how you're engaging with the literature versus your own experiences in writing that up. But in general, yes, as Samantha said, if you're drawing on others' ideas, scholarship, cite it. If it's your own experiences, then that obviously doesn't need to reference somebody else because it's your own experiences.
All right, thank you.
Welcome. Okay, Rana, I saw before that you had your hand up.
Yes. I wanted to ask about journal reviews.
Okay.
And my question is, if we've, for example, read a journal over 1 year time and decided to write a review about it, technically we are in a sense paraphrasing the overarching message. Does that get us in trouble, or should we try as much as possible to do direct quotations from the articles that we think were the most important, or maybe the most eloquent or the most encompassing?
I think I'm gonna answer that
Hi,
one.
Sammy.
I have a strong suspicion that you'd be doing this for my class. One answer is actually you should ask that question in class because your colleagues will all appreciate the answer to it. The second is if you are drawing on claims in specific articles, you should cite those specific articles. If you are saying, I get the theme of X comes up relatively often in this journal over a course of a year, then you do not, in fact, need to cite specific articles because you're not drawing on claims made in those articles. You're drawing on your own experience of overview of those articles.
May I do a follow-up question?
Mm-hmm.
So just to double check before our submission, is there a way for us to kind of upload for example, a journal review to a website where we can verify whether something is perceived as plagiarism as far as paraphrasing goes, or are we making the submissions and then the professor is making the decision whether this is kind of whether it's well done or whether it needed to be cited?
Again, probably something to bring up in the specific class because your colleagues in that class would want to hear the answer. If you are unsure, you can always, there are not sort of sites you can take it to. If you are unsure, you can have a conversation with the instructor of that class before submitting. Okay. Hey, does this look okay? And you'll get an answer one way or the other. So that is what I would recommend doing in that circumstance.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, so we have about just over, oh, sorry, Christina, your hand is up.
I'm sorry, like I don't I didn't want to interrupt the session,
No,
just
go
like
ahead.
wanted to ask, and I'm sorry for the noise in the background. I'm at the campus center, so just very quickly to ask this question. So what should I do in a situation when I would like to cite information from a website And that happened to me quite recently. The paper I mentioned to you, Karen, about the social identities. So there is a Center for Creative Leadership from Geneva. And I used information from the website, but like when I wanted to scroll the authors so that I can give credit to the authors in references and in a footnote, it was just like written leadership efficiency staff, that it was written by our leadership efficiency staff. So there were no names and last names. So I just like cited the information in the website, like the year, the month it was written, the title, and the center that published it. So what should I do in that kind of situation?
So every citation format, so Sammy mentioned earlier that there's some parenthetical citation formats where you include the author date in the text itself. There's some formats that use more footnotes. Each format has a guide, has its own policies, in a sense, for how different kinds of materials should be cited. Thank you, Jason. Style guides. Words are escaping me today. So depending on which format you're using, the style guide will tell you essentially how you need to cite that kind of website. There is a site that I find very helpful, and I'll put it in the chat, that I often use to just verify, especially when I'm submitting a manuscript to a journal and they're telling me to use a citation format that is not one I use all that often and I'm particularly familiar with. The Purdue University Online Writing Lab, or Purdue OWL, has a pretty thorough kind of site that lets you do information about how to cite in different with different style formats. Of course, different associations that have style have comprehensive these days probably also did be versions of their style guides as well, but the Purdue OWL is helpful for some of them. Sorry, it looks like you wanted to jump in there for a second.
You were sort of breaking up there.
Oh, sorry. I was just saying that there are more comprehensive versions of these style guides, sometimes requiring, I mean, they're not all free, but Purdue OWL has a fairly comprehensive overview of the style guidelines for the more often used formatting styles.
I should note briefly, following up, that you cite with the information that exists. So if a document that you want to cite is not authored, then you can't cite an author. That's fine.
Right.
And sometimes things will be undated, in which case you cite them as no date.
Thank you very much, the both of you.
So we have not a lot of time left, and I want to use a little bit of time to just make some suggestions for how you might keep track of the material that you're using for your classes, for your papers. And I'll say that this is not something that I did at least not when I was a master's student. And so I downloaded, well, I did a lot of hard copy reading still, but I downloaded a lot of material to my computer and then had a lot of trouble keeping track of it over time. It may seem easy to keep track of material that you are using for specific classes right now, but when it comes time to do things like studying for qualifying exams, where you need to look at material across multiple classes, writing a master's thesis or a master's project, capstone paper, preparing your dissertation proposal, there is a lot of material that you're going to be looking at, and knowing where to find it and having a way to easily kind of review the key arguments that are made can be very, very helpful. So in our remaining time, I want to just make suggestions about using reference management platforms, reference management software. So in its most basic form, this is essentially a software application that stores citation and reference information about books, articles, websites, whatever resources it is that you're using. As Sammy said, if you are using one of these reference management software platforms, it makes it much easier also to put together a list of references or a bibliography when you're writing a paper. But it also can do, most reference management platforms can do much more than just store the citation information. So there are a bunch of different reference management platforms. Some are only available for Mac, some are only available for PCs, some have been around for years and years and years. But the one that I want to suggest to you is a platform called Zotero. It is free, which is one of the main reasons I'm suggesting it to you. It's open source, so it is unlikely to become not free anytime in the near future. And it's also cross-platform, so you can use it on the web. You can download a desktop version of it to your computer, whether that is an Apple computer or a PC. It is available also for mobile, for tablets, so both Android and iOS platforms. And it can sync between all of those. So it's a reference management system that you can use if you're in the library on campus and you don't have your computer with you for some reason, but you have a Zotero account, you can log in and use it from there. If you're on your iPad or you're on a computer, either way, you can, whatever platform you're on, you can use the software. Sorry about that. People in my house are coming into my room, into my office when they shouldn't be. Anyway, so I want to just share my screen for a minute and show you a few things about this platform and say a few things about why it's useful and how it's useful. So I am going to first just show you the website for Zotero. So you can see here, Zotero, the site. And you can see as I scroll down kind of what it looks like when you have a reference library. So you could see here the titles of the different publications, authors, years, etc., information, the full information about the publication. And I'll show you on in just a second when I log in what it can look like for you as you start to build your own personal library. Let's see. So this is the web version of my library, and I will say actually, I don't actually use Zotero, so I put a couple things together to show you today. I use a Mac only platform that I've used for years and years and years before Zotero existed. So I don't have much in here. But when you download material into Zotero, again, it'll essentially download all of the what is called metadata about the publication, the author, the title, what kind of material it is, when it was added to your library, the URL if it's a website. So this one is a website, right? And then you can open it. So you can open the PDF and read it. If you have the desktop version, you can read it and annotate. So put notes right into it. You can highlight, and the web version, I think you're unable to do that, but it'll sync. So if you download it to your desktop and you make notes or you annotate, you highlight, you underline, that'll show up then. So this is, something I highlighted in the desktop version of Zotero, and now is showing up when I view it on the web. You can add tags to any publication. So you can put together all of the references that you use for a certain class, right? So all of the material you read for, the introductory theory class and conflict resolution, or global governance, or, whatever class it is, you can create a tag and note that it's part of, let's say, the introductory theory class, Conres 623, and then go back and have all that material to look at later. You can, then later filter by those tags as you're looking at it. I can show you some more about using the platform, but the main things that I want to note are that it's really helpful in part because it integrates with Microsoft Word and with Google Docs. So if you open a Google Doc, can you see my are you seeing my Google Doc now? Sammy, are you seeing a blank Google
Yes.
Doc? All right.
Yes.
So if you
Yes.
have, okay, thank you. So if you have integrated the two, which is something that, once you create a Zotero account, you can do, it will show up when you're writing in Google Docs or in Microsoft Word as a tab. And then if you click on that tab, you can could enter a citation into Google Docs based on, so I don't think you're going to be able to see this because it's showing my desktop. Oops, it just crashed. Okay, so I can't show this to you right now. But you can integrate citations into your documents, the perils of technology, right? I'm talking about the value of software that just crashed as I was trying to show you something on it. So that's the first time that's happened to me though. So you could enter a citation in, and then once you are done writing the paper, you can create a bibliography based on whatever documents you've cited that come from your Zotero library that are integrated into the paper. So it makes it a lot more efficient, the process of creating references, list of references and bibliographies. As Sammy said, it's very important to be, and Samantha also said, it's important to be careful when you're downloading material to Zotero or another site's library, that the metadata, the information is correct, so that when you cite it, you end up with a correct citation. But it's very useful in that way. Zotero and other reference management platforms also allow you to take notes directly in them. So if you are taking notes on your readings and you do that in Zotero, as opposed to, this is something that I often find myself doing and catch myself doing and then need to correct myself in a random Word document somewhere that I don't know if I'm going to be able to find later on. You have those notes that are connected with the document itself. And if you read the document in Adobe, if you're reading it on an iPad, in some PDF reader application, whatever notes you take there will sync so that you can view them in Zotero as well, meaning that you can have all your notes about the material you're reading and internalizing in the same place as you have the resources you are drawing from as well. And then the last thing that I want to say about Zotero that I think is actually not something that's possible with the platform that I generally use is that Zotero has this possibility of creating groups. And what that means is that you can put together a group of, students in your cohort, students who are in a class together, a group made up of you and the professor who you are helping with their research. And that allows you to share references in Zotero. You can see one another's notes. you can comment and engage with one another about the readings. And that's something that I think can be very helpful as you're thinking about, again, doing things like preparing for qualifying exams, if you're in the doctoral program, if you are in a class where you are being asked to present on, discuss, collaborate on synthesizing readings. It can be very helpful to look at those materials together or try to share your understanding of the material through written formats and not only through talking about it. So the Zotero groups, I think, are a particularly useful feature of this platform and something that you might think about using as you are kind of engaging with material over the course of your classes and throughout your degree program. So we're almost out of time. So I'm going to stop there and just, again, check to see if there are any questions, concerns, interventions that anyone would like to add at this point. And I'm happy to also, continue the conversation later since, like I said, we just have a few minutes left. Christina.
Yeah, so thank you, Karen, about sharing about Zotero in details. I've heard of that platform before, but I've never used it. I also wanted to ask you and Professor Barkin as well about another reference management software. I mean, I used it a couple of it, Mendeley. What do you think about that software? Is it?
So Mendeley recently changed. I think it no longer has a desktop option, and it was a free platform, but it is actually moving. It is, I think it is owned by a company I can't remember which company, but I've heard of over time rumors about it no longer being free. It's not open source, so it's a little bit different in that respect. It also has, many of the same features, collaboration features, groups, and so forth. So I think probably very similar in terms of the way that it's set up. I just, in terms of its accessibility, I think Zotero is a little bit better in that respect.
Thank you so much.
And Healey Library actually has some documentation on using Zotero. So I'm going to put the site for that in the chat as well. And I promise I'm not getting any kickbacks. It's just free, open source, and cross-platform, which to me makes it probably the best option to suggest. Any lingering thoughts before we wrap up for today? And Samantha, I just realized now that you are logged in as Jason, so apologies for that earlier comment. I didn't see it until now.
Not at all. Thank you.
I was also trying to figure out why 3 people were logged in as POW.
I'll just pop in and say hi. This is Jason on a different account.
Hi, Jason.
The real Jason.
Keeping it exciting.
Yeah, I just wanted to also stress the consistency. I think whatever citation style you choose, just to be consistent, as Sammy and Karen said. So again, some citation styles have, footnotes or endnotes or references, bibliography, etc. But in the style guides, they're listed. It's almost like you have your exact instructions. So as long as you are consistent in the style guide that you choose, whether it's Chicago, APA, etc., then basically following those instructions will tell you exactly what you need in there. That's how I do it as well for myself. Yeah. It's less confusing.
Great. All right. Well, on that note, I think we'll wrap up with 1 minute to spare. If anyone has questions about any of this, please feel free to reach out. And looking forward to seeing your well-cited papers in the near future. Bye, everyone.